with a focused intervention on early literacy, the Nipun program. The likelihood of millions of children going without foundation literacy, and this push from at the policy level to you know uh, get to the Nipun goals and the NEP goals, that has done one good thing. That has actually got states to start acting. Most of the states have now got their act together and are developing planning programs for foundation literacy. And so for organizations like us who work in the area of foundation literacy and literature, they probably could not have been a better time like this. This good time has been again intersected by a high time in our own organization journey. It's been a 20 years old organization now, and people who have known Room to Read from earlier would know that we started off small as an organization, mainly focusing on libraries and literature. But down the road, we also realized that both library and literature has to be situated in a larger framework of literacy for them to be made meaningful. So as an organization, we acknowledged the need for literacy for all and pledged to facilitate a larger life experience of children that is ethical and enriched through literacy. In doing so, we stress the definition of literacy itself to accommodate deeper reading and learning experiences. Now, with these beliefs and learning, about 7 years back, we started a journey of scaling up of our literacy interventions, actively in partnerships with state governments. We were strongly supported in this effort by the United States Agency for International Development, who helped us first to generate evidence in support of our comprehensive literacy model, and then to work with governments to institutionalize the learnings through statewide initiatives. The advent of Nipun has only strengthened this process. Under SARI, the Scaling Up Early Reading Intervention, the USAID-funded project that we're talking about, we were also able to share state-of-the-art knowledge and research on foundation literacy with all stakeholders through these annual seminars for which we have gathered here today. A lot of this knowledge and learnings have not only enriched our own understanding of the domain, but also brought new knowledge to the sector. This year's seminar specifically is based on the theme of reading equals. Obviously, I mean, we all know that, but like reading equals knowledge because it helps us to know ourselves, our history, our culture. It also helps us to see the world outside our immediate context. Reading equals empowerment. It helps to open our minds, enhance our worldview, find solutions to challenges, and build confidence and agency. No surprise then that reading is also a great equalizer. It eliminates inequities, inspires people to stand against discrimination, and makes the world a better place. Reading and education have consistently brought poor and disadvantaged children out of poverty. Educated and well-read girls, we all know, have created an equal space for themselves in the society. So through this seminar today, which is also a culmination of a 3-week campaign on the same theme that Room to Read organized, we propose to look at the impact of reading beyond literacy as well. And to frame this discussion, we'll have a talk today by Uma Mahadevanji, who as a top bureaucrat of Karnataka's Rural Development and Panchayati Raj Department has used reading and public libraries as a means of promoting empowerment, decentralization, and democracy in rural Karnataka. An excellent case study, and I should talk more about that. We are also delighted to have amongst us Ms. Karen Klimowski, Deputy Mission Director of Usaid. And as I just said, our journey towards literacy at scale would not have been possible without the active Usaid support that we have received. Later, through our panel discussions, we will explore some additional facets of literacy, including its linkages to literature and texts. We are fortunate today to have some of the most relevant thought leaders with us from diverse backgrounds and fields as speakers and panelists. I would therefore hope that you all enjoy the day's proceedings today and make full use of the networking opportunity. I'm certain that this day will act as a collation and amplification of everybody's voice for the cause of foundation literacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for setting the tone of the day so well. And moving forward, I would now like to invite Karen Klimowski, Deputy Mission Director, Usaid India. Thank you for being with us here today. Karen, a career member of the US Senior Foreign Service, has worked in development for over 30 years. She currently serves as the Deputy Mission Director for Usaid India. Previously, she served with Usaid in the Philippines, Uganda, Kenya, and Indonesia, focusing on complex developmental challenges in health, education, democracy, governance, environment, and energy. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And Additional Chief Secretary, Ms. Mahadewan, Director, Mr. Pandey, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning and namaskar. I'm honored to be here today representing the United States government. All right, I'm honored to be here today representing, it just died. Representing the United States Agency for International Development, or better known as USAID. And for this national seminar on Reading Equals. This year, the United States and India are celebrating our 75 years of official diplomatic relations. At 75, the US and India remain committed to relationship rooted in shared tradition of democracy, freedom, tolerance, and equal opportunity for all citizens. With this shared vision, we are tackling some of the world's most pressing development challenges together. In the field of education, USAID is working with the public and private sector to improve the quality of education and reading skills in 16 Indian states by implementing reformative learning approaches. At USAID, we believe that education is the great equalizer and enabler. When children and youth are prepared to go to school, learn, and gain the skills they need for life, they can build more hopeful and prosperous futures for themselves, their families, communities, and countries. Also, equal access to quality education is a foundational driver for greater economic growth, improved health outcomes, sustained democratic governance, and more peaceful and resilient societies. During my time working here in India over the past over 3 years, I have had the pleasure of participating in school education events and meeting with stakeholders and policymakers. Throughout, I have heard the same message that foundational literacy, numeracy, and social-emotional skills are foundational for future learning and to success. Completion of school education not only provides strong returns in individuals' earnings and income, it also provides people with the capability to act independently, advocate for improved government policies, adapt to changing conditions, and make the most of their assets and opportunities. As part of our commitment to this objective, USAID is supporting Room to Read in the implementation of Scaling Up Early Reading Intervention, or SEERI program, in Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. Through regular program assessments, we are witnessing improvements in age and grade appropriate literacy outcomes. And we all know, unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic affected education systems worldwide, with children, youth, teachers, and families facing great challenges due to lockdowns and school closures. I was fortunate to arrive in India in April of 2019, so to have a year before the pandemic hit, so did get some exposure to visit programs. And I think this program and the work that everybody's doing is even more important now to bring people back up, bring the students and families back up to previous levels, or to encourage them to gain so that they can continue with their education. We visited some schools in Varanasi recently and heard from the teachers and the headmaster on how they created the lending libraries, which you mentioned, during the pandemic, to not only try to keep the students learning, but to encourage their parents who were sitting at home as they weren't working or in lockdown to also improve their reading skills so they could read together as families. So USAID has remained committed to working with our partner countries to ensure that learners and communities stay safe and continue to learn. As I mentioned, when the pandemic began, USAID assisted state governments in developing and distributing inclusive learning materials for children and teachers in 4 Indian states to reduce the learning loss amongst students, targeting vulnerable populations in rural areas as well as girls, who we know are less likely to attend school, and during the lockdown and the COVID disruption really were impacted. In order to adapt to remote learning, USAID supported state governments to conduct children's literature workshops and develop multilingual learning materials, including flipbooks, videos, audio games, and repository of digital books. USAID also helped design teacher training modules that are gender responsive in their approach to acknowledging, addressing, and discussing gender stereotypes to enhance girls' education and participation. Additionally, USAID helped establish a parent's handbook to foster a stronger learning environment at home. These interventions focused on public schools to prioritize the education of under-resourced populations and prevent learning loss amongst millions of students across India who have continued their studies despite more than a year of school closures and lockdowns. I am happy to share that all these efforts were possible due to the commitment and adaptability of our partner organization, Room to Read, and of course, the excellent support we received from the state governments, teachers, educators, and everybody else involved during this time. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate the government of India for launching Nipun Bharat in July last year to prioritize foundational learning. USAID is supporting the Government of India initiative by providing training to teachers, developing reading materials, setting up libraries to boost reading habits, and advocating at the state and national level on foundational literacy. As I close, I would like to express how proud we are at USAID to have been able to support Room to Read's National Reading Program campaign. I am also very glad to see the additional emphasis that this seminar is placing on the significance of reading and promoting tolerance and helping build constructive communities and positive citizenship values. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity, and I want to congratulate, and we need to give cheers to all the champions in this room and who are here today advocating and promoting reading for all. Thank you very much, and here's to the champions.
Additional Chief Secretary, Untitled Chapter, Dr. year you're out of school, schools were closed, colleges were closed, undergraduates were closed. So we started asking ourselves whether the role of libraries could play a role in helping children tide over this period of anxiety and stress. And that's how we came up with this participatory approach called Odua Belaku, which means the fire of reading, which was launched on the 1st of November 2020 as a way of revitalizing the libraries, which had already fallen into some kind of dormant state. But we decided to revive it with 4 principles. 1, we said that there would be a separate children's section in each library. 2, we said libraries would extend their timings from 4 hours to 6 hours daily, and we increased the payments for the librarians. The third was, and this was key, we said that all rural children in Karnataka between the age of 6 to 18 will get free membership. They'll get 1 library card absolutely free of cost, and the Gram Panchayat will pay whatever is the refundable deposit. And the fourth was also equally important, was that this would not be only a state-sponsored initiative, but it would be completely participatory and would involve the community. Next slide, please. So the first thing was library cards for rural children. I'm happy to say that what started on the 1st of November 2020 has now grown, and today I've posted on Twitter that we have reached nearly 22 lakh enrollments. 2.2 million children, rural Karnataka, have been enrolled as members and have received their library cards. The library card is an entry into the world of reading, into the world of books, into everything that books offer, imagination, language development, and so on. Next slide, please. Yes, the second thing was Pustaka Jolige. This was a community movement. We said that how does the state push a community movement? So the state, this was very interesting. So we had the BGVS, Bharat Gyan Vigyan Samiti, working with us, many civil society organizations, and they said, why don't we take a little bag, empty bag, and move around in a small procession from house to house. And we say, in Kannada, there's, I've translated it over there. We say, Navu nimma mane baglige, nimma ondu pustaka nan joligege. I'm saying it in Kannada, I'll translate. We are coming to your doorstep. Please give us just 1 book for our bag. So this little procession went from house to house in villages across Karnataka. In many villages, they were received with band sets, and people greeted them and said they were very excited and so on. We have collected 1.1 million books, both through community donations and through the donations of organizations like Azim Premji Foundation, who readily agreed on a WhatsApp message to give us books for 1,600 libraries. Pratham Books, Shikshana Foundation, other donors, 3M, Open Text, and so on and so forth. Details are all there, but most important was the donations from people. We think that rural Karnataka does not read, we think that rural India does not read. But it was surprising even to me that in one taluk alone, in North Karnataka, in Koppal, a week-long Pustaka Jolige collected 8,000 books. And these were fabulous books. These were books written by Kuvempu, by Tejasvi, by some of Karnataka's award-winning poets and writers. So this was one very heartening thing. Next. Yes, these are just some pictures of the transformation. I think one of the things we told the CEOs and the Zilla Panchayats to do was, no hard and fast, hidebound rules. You can go wherever your imagination takes you. And so these are the kinds of transformations that have occurred. Next. So a lot of attention paid to furniture, to interiors, to study tables, to child-sized sofas, bean bags, chessboards, indoor plants. It was very touching to see the ways in which rural communities have imagined the space. Next. Murals. Murals, we found, were so inspiring for children that everybody started getting into this whole thing of painting murals, and that on the right is the logo, which was reimagined in different panchayats. The logo is, a girl reading. That's the logo of Odua Belaku. Next. So these are some of the libraries, as I said, child-sized sofas, in the smallest, most remote rural panchayats. Next. Next. Yes. So, learning spaces. So now another thing that we've been able to do is gradually we have created a school to library connect so that school children are being brought on a regular basis, once a week or once in a fortnight, to the libraries. They come after school also. They straight away come after school to do their homework. They come on weekends, on Saturdays, and on Sundays. So we changed the timings of the library on Saturdays and Sundays so that the library is open all day on Saturday and Sunday. Next. They're also socially inclusive community spaces. So we have seniors coming, we have women coming, we have self-help group members coming, we have farmers coming. We have farmers coming and asking librarians to show them YouTube videos about something to do with some fertilizer or some pest that they've seen in a crop. And so the library is really being reimagined. It's also interesting to see that when we took up a chess campaign last month with all the excitement about the chess Olympiad in Chennai, librarians initially told us that, you can't play chess, you can't play carom in a library because it makes a noise. The children are going to make a noise and disturb others. But communities came together to give a second room for the library. So now you have libraries with 2 rooms and 3 rooms, where the second room has the carom board and the chess board and children getting excited, and the other room is for reading and so on. Next. We have everybody coming to the library. We have seniors, we have ASHA workers, we have frontline workers, we have police constables coming and playing a game of carom in between their shifts, and the library is open to everyone. Next. This is a library. The pictures here is very interesting because this library, close to Bangalore, is 24/7. It runs 24/7. A group of kids. So we have kids, students, older students, college students, as well as younger kids forming study groups. And this is important because kids have not had a space till now to really form their own study groups and study together. Group study is a way for weaker students to learn from slightly more advanced students, and it's also a way for them to learn to work together. And here is a library which runs 24/7, where there are groups of students, college students, who are actually preparing for different kinds of exams, who even sleep in the library. They take the key. And this is how the community has, taken over the library space. They sleep in the library. The panchayat has a subsidized canteen, so they eat at the canteen, and they study at the library. Next. So the panchayats started reimagining the library space, not only as a building, but also outside. So here is a garden library. This particular one, it's an open-air library. This particular one is in a remote place in Belgaum, in Khanapur Taluk, just next to the Western Ghats, near the forest. And, that building is the library, but outside they've created a garden, and they've got a heritage well. It's a 100-year-old well, so they redid the whole thing. And, those who want to sit inside and work at the computer or read books inside can do so, but there's also space outside with benches and so on. Next. These are, again, some of the garden libraries. So this took off in a big way because MGNREGA, the livelihood program, also was commandeered to create these garden libraries. Next. The other thing we found, and this was important, was that when the community realized that the government was not going to open the libraries beyond 6 hours because we pay the workers a certain honorarium, and we can't extend it beyond that, the community said, we will set up terraces above the libraries so that even when the library is closed, students can continue to study. And these are some examples. This is, again, something which we found very, very heartening because this showed that the community was trying to innovate at its own level and based on their needs. So this is another thing in Dakshin Kannada district. Little free libraries at every bus stop, public bus stop, and in every panchayat. This is now being taken to other districts as well. And this is, again, important because till now in government, there's always this fear of, how to monitor the books, who's taking the books, how many people, how do you lock it up at night, things like that. And here we were actually putting these open, free little libraries over there and encouraging the community to come and pick a book, take it with you if necessary, put it back later, and actually fostering some integrity within the community. So that was interesting. Next. And reading corners. So teachers started getting interested. I still remember, right at the beginning, there was a teacher in Koppal who celebrated his child's birthday by sponsoring the repainting of one library. This is another example where a reading corner was set up in a classroom as part of the reading movement. Next. Yes, so this is important. And this actually showed us that it was beginning to sow the seeds of a community movement. When we have our libraries at the panchayat headquarters, and the panchayat typically has 4 or 5 villages. So sometimes it tends to be far, even if it's 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers. It can be far, especially in tribal and hilly areas, to walk up that 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers. Sometimes there are other kinds of inequities. Sometimes girls are not able to access. Sometimes tribal kids are not able to access. So this is a village library that was not paid for. Not a single rupee was paid for from the government. This was set up by the community themselves when they saw how well their panchayat library was doing. And this is called the Savitribai Phule Library. It's a beautiful little library in a tribal hadi. Next. And that's not the only one. So, Gopahali Library in Ramnagara district, which is a district in the plains, the milk cooperative is running a very flourishing milk business out there. And they saw how important the library was becoming for their kids and their college students. And they said, fine, so we have other villages and we will sponsor libraries in our villages. So those are pictures from that. Next. Another thing we did in Karnataka was that we said that every taluk, we have around 230 taluks, we said that every taluk should have at least one beacon library. A beacon library we conceptualized as something which is barrier-free, which can have aids and appliances, as well as a ramp, railing, and so on, to help persons with disabilities, especially students with with disabilities. We found that this was again something that our panchayats took to very, very enthusiastically. Instead of 200 and odd, which is what we mandated, we already have a commitment of close to 500, 470 odd, and 128 have already been completed. Next. So we've been having programs. Libraries are not static organizations or institutions. They need to have programs in order to build a reading culture and use the library. So Gatiyo Do Abhyana is one program, Read Aloud program, which we're doing with Adyan Foundation. We have multiple civil society organizations working with us. Adyan Foundation, as in Azim Premji Foundation, doing this program of Read Alouds. Read Alouds in school, Read Alouds in the library, regular Read Alouds, and Read Alouds by volunteers, Read Alouds by children's mothers and fathers as well. So this is one which was very, very successful, and we're planning to revive it after a couple of months. Next. So chess in libraries. This was another program that we did during the month when we had the chess Olympiad. And again, that was hugely successful. Just in the tiny district of Kodagu, we had 4,500 kids and adults participating across all the panchayats. This was in libraries, mind you. And then at taluk level, we had one person who was a participant with a disability. He won, and he went all the way to the district level tournament. It created this whole thing that chess, is a game of strategy, it's a game of thought, it's a game of reflection, and that also has a place in our lives. So that was one thing which was very successful. Next. We have other programs with other partners. My Library for Me is a citizenship program being done with an organization called CMCA. Next. We have partnerships with India Literacy Project, with the Shikshana Foundation, with others for rural libraries as learning centers, career guidance, and so on. Next. This is an example of a 6 by 4, 6 foot by 4 foot career chart, which is very, very popular. And we have it in all the 6 districts, some 1,600 libraries of North Karnataka. Tremendously popular, and kids are always hunting for different ways to chart the trajectory of their dreams. Next. We have a very, very interesting partnership with an organization called Yuva Chintana Foundation in 70 libraries of Yadgir and Koppal, which are very backward districts, working on STEAM education for kids, girls and boys. We start without laptops, but by teaching them the rudiments of computational thinking and coding, and then we give them laptops, and then they start working on things like Scratch Junior. It is tremendously exciting, and more than anything else, the librarians themselves are very excited with this. Next. So these are some of the, one of the projects that a child presented at a share-out event was actually a small cardboard model of his library with a light, functioning light, and so on, which was very, very moving. Next. So we have Dell Foundation, Dell Technologies and Shikshana Foundation are working with us on something which is again very interesting, providing Android TVs and digital devices with content which is curated and with parental controls, which is now in 1,300 libraries. We have facilitators for each of these libraries who come regularly once a week to teach kids and take them through the whole process of the digital modules. Working very well, and we hope the Chief Minister as well as Dell and other organizations are keen to support us to expand this in more. This actually makes it possible because this provides internet access, data plans, so on, and this actually makes it possible to think of libraries, the rural libraries, as decentralized learning hubs. Next. We have mentoring programs. We've got this in 2 districts, Granthamitra, college volunteers from a trust and a college, coming regularly to teach kids about reading, about writing, basically filling in the gaps of social capital that kids who are first-generation learners may not receive at home, planning to expand this to the whole state through college volunteers. Next. Librarians training. So another part of what we're doing is training librarians, both in computer skills, basic computer skills. 5-day training has been already started through our own RDPR University, and also training them in child-friendly library management techniques. Next. This, again, is on the left is a picture of all the activities where the librarians became facilitators for the STEAM education. Next. So on social media, again, we find all our librarians, panchayats, zilla panchayats, others, sharing their activities on social media. So that itself becomes a way for them to communicate and learn from each other. Next. So these are just some stats. We have renovated with buildings, with lights, with electricity, paints, murals, furniture, and so on, around 3,600 libraries. We have provided computers in around 3,300. This is all from Panchayat's own funds. The department has not spent anything. This is from Panchayat's own funds, their own resources, tax resources, as well as their finance commission grants and so on. In some cases, we have got CSR funding, but in very few. Libraries identified for beacon libraries, as I said, 494. We have already completed 128. Books, close to 2 million books, 11.85 lakh. Children enrolled. This is an ongoing thing, and it's very exciting because this could not have happened without the children themselves being interested and the teachers finding it relevant and meaningful. So this is exciting. Next. Some feedback from kids. These are 2 kids who talk about how, the library is an exciting space for them. It's a space where they're on their own. They're not being monitored. They're not being told, don't touch the mouse, don't touch the screen, don't touch the book, and so on. Everything is open and on display, and so on. So kids tend to find it very exciting. We also have child-sized furniture so that they can come straight after school, do their homework, sit, learn from each other, things like that. Next. So what do rural libraries have to offer as a development intervention? It's not just access to books. So for middle-class people like us, all of us have been to libraries, right? So we still tend to go to a library, drop off 2 books, and pick up 2 more books, and then go home. That's not what a library means to the rural child. It means access to books, yes, but it also means access to online resources. More importantly, it means access to safe spaces, especially for rural girls. They have told me, very movingly, about how at home, even in their own homes, sometimes they don't have an atmosphere which facilitates their learning or facilitates their study. And so here is a space for them to read, reflect, and learn. It's also a socially inclusive and intergenerational community space. There are scores of children who come with their grandparents. Grandma comes, or granddad comes, reads a newspaper while the child is studying, or the parent comes, or somebody else from the family comes. Decentralized learning hubs, I already spoke about this, and knowledge centers for rural communities. So we've already placed copies of the Constitution, copies of the Panchayat Raj Act. We're planning to place copies of the annual reports of departments, of Zilla Panchayat, budget, the plan of the Panchayat, and make libraries into information centers where the public can actually come and see the action plan or the budget of their Panchayat, of their local government, and again, spend time learning. Next. Yes, next. So I just want to end with this picture. This is a picture from a very remote library. in Ramnagara, you can see it's on the banks of the Kaveri. And this is a child with a disability, visually impaired child. Here she's actually, I couldn't locate the video, but she actually talks about how she's able to access books through Sugamya Pustakalaya, which is a Government of India website for children with disabilities. And she's able to listen to songs, she's able to listen to stories, and she's able to learn at the library. And this, for me, offers the greatest potential because children with disabilities are usually not able to get all the support they need in school. But devices, aids and appliances to all children may not be feasible for a long time to come. But maybe as decentralized learning spaces, not only for all children, but especially also for children with disabilities of different kinds, we could, provide support for them as well. That's it, I think. That's the last slide. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Umaji, for the enriching insights on the rural libraries in Karnataka. I would now request Mr. Saurav Banerjee, if he could please felicitate both our esteemed guests, Ms. Uma Mahadevanji and Karen. Can we have a huge round of applause for both our esteemed speakers? Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you very much, Umaji, and thank you, Saurav, for felicitating the guests. We now move to a very much anticipated section of the day. I would request you and Umaji to stay back, and maybe Apurva, you can just escort Karen back to her space. So as I said, we now move to the launch of Heads Together. Heads Together is a fireside series by Room to Read. But if you're wondering what Heads Together is all about, or how did Room to Read even come up with the idea of having Heads Together, a fireside chat series, the best person to answer this question would be Ms. Purnima Garg, who is the Deputy Country Director for Room to Read, and who has been also driving this initiative of Room to Read. I would request Ms. Purnima Garg to please come up on the stage and give a brief context about the Fireside Chat series.
Hi, thank you, David. So the most awaited, from last 1 year, we've been working on a concept. It's called Heads Together. Fireside Chat was conceptualized by Room to Read India. The intent was to conduct a series of chats with different stakeholders to advocate for common cause. Our aim through these chats is to positively influence the stakeholders to mainstream early grade education, girls' education, gender equality, inclusion, and life skills through the government system. Through the Fireside Chat platform, we look to invite heads from the government, departments, like-minded organizations, practitioners, academicians, and other key influencers working in the same space as guests. In season 1 of this show, that has 5 episodes, some of the prominent names from across the industry We have Dr. Shailaja Menon, professor and a language educator from Azim Premji University. Ms. Shweta Sharma Kukreja, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director for Central Square Foundation. She is in fact with us today. Thank you, Shweta, for making this. Ms. Geeta Dharamrajan, renowned children's author and founder of Katha. Reena Dhobalji, she's a headmistress of Government Primary School in Ajabpur Kalan, Dehradun. And Ms. Sohini Bhattacharya, Chief Executive Officer, Breakthrough India. It is my pleasure now to invite Umaji to officially launch the season 1 of the Heads Together. We will be honored. So, can someone just get this? So the screen is right in front. If you can click that, is very important. Yeah. It's not coming. It's not coming. Thank you so much. And the first episode of the season 1 is actually live just now on YouTube. You can go and watch it. Every week we are going to be releasing 1 episode, and we just hope to seek your support on this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maji. Thank you, Saurav.
Thank you, Purnima. And with all that wonderful energy, let's move to our first panel discussion of the day. Literacy and literature together, opportunities and challenges. It is time to acknowledge that literature is an integral part of the literacy experience for children. We now need to think together about how we, as various kinds of networks and systems, can bring more relevant literature into classrooms. To start the next panel, I would like to invite our moderator for the first panel, Madhu Ranjan ji. Can I please invite you to come and be seated on the stage? A very warm welcome to Madhu ji. Come. Madhuji is a development professional with long years of experience in the education sector. She has been a teacher educator, as well as an education advisor in national and international organizations. She recently retired as senior education specialist from Usaid India and now works as a freelance consultant. Welcome, Madhuji. You're also requested to please invite your panel on the stage.
Thank you, Nini. What we just witnessed, and I walked in when Karen was about to finish her remarks. Can't hear me? Okay. Can you hear me well? Okay. So I heard the last part of Karen's remarks. I saw the full presentation by Umaji, and of course I saw the launch of Heads Together. Absolutely impressive, you know, whatever I witnessed so far. I'm sure everybody is spellbound. what Umaji presented, I thought, was something that should be replicated across the country. Why not? You know, it can be done in Karnataka, it can be done elsewhere. And we know that there are organizations that support rural libraries, so maybe governments can collaborate with those donor organizations and kind of, you know, spread this far and wide in the country. Heads Together, I thought, was an amazing, you know, platform where I think it's going to be exciting fair, and I think we are all looking forward to it. Absolutely fantastic and innovative. Congratulations, Room to Read, for doing that, and thank you as well. So, friends, in this section, we will be discussing on literacy and literature together, challenges and opportunities. And I'm delighted to introduce to you the distinguished panelists. Let me first call upon the stage Dr. Madhav Chavan. Please come and be seated, Dr. Chavan. After obtaining a PhD in chemistry from the Ohio State University and serving as a visiting faculty at the University of Houston, Dr. Chavan returned to India to teach chemistry. But soon he was drawn into the country's national literacy mission. In 1995, as a result of a UNICEF initiative, sorry, I'm so into Usaid. Okay, as a result of a UNICEF initiative, he co-founded Pratham Education Foundation to address the problems in universal primary education in Mumbai. But over the years, Dr. Chavan led the development of the organization and expansion of its work, pioneering large-scale innovations to address foundational literacy and numeracy issues among all of India's children. Dr. Chavan has been awarded several prestigious international awards and has received several honors on behalf of Pratham. He stepped down as the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham in 2015 and has been focusing on creating and applying digital innovations and resources in education. So that's Dr. Chavan for you. Next, I'd like to call Dr. Dee Jingra on stage. Dr. Jingran, as perhaps you all know, is the founder director of Language and Learning Foundation, a non-profit focused on improving foundational learning of students through early literacy and multilingual education programs. The foundation works closely with state governments to catalyze education reform at scale. Dr. Jingran has contributed to the primary education sector for 30 years within and outside the Indian government. Within the government, as an IS officer, he served in policy-making roles in the Ministry of Education at the national level and as Principal Secretary Education and State Project Director of DPEP and SSA in Assam. Besides, he was Senior Advisor to UNICEF India, Advisor to the Ministry of Education in Nepal, and Asia Regional Director and Chief Program Officer with Room to Read. He has made significant contributions to the development and implementation of early grade reading programs in several countries in Asia and Africa, as well as first language-based multilingual education programs in several states in India. Dr. Jingran has authored 3 books in primary education based on empirical research and has contributed to several books and journals. Dr. Jingran holds a master's degree in economics and a PhD in education. So welcome, Dr. Jingran. Next, I'd like to call Ms. Shweta Sharma Kukreja on the dais. Shweta is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Central Square Foundation. Shweta has been a part of the founding team at the foundation, and she leads their strategy, operations, and strategic partnerships. One of her main focus areas is foundational literacy and numeracy across system reform, classroom instruction, and governance. She possesses close to 2 decades of professional experience in management and education. Her corporate background includes work at the Boston Consulting Group and Citibank. She's also been a visiting faculty in the disciplines of human resources and organizational behavior for various business schools. Her 2 key areas of interest are systems reform at scale and leadership and organizational behavior. Shavita earned her bachelor's degree in economics from the Sri Ram College of Commerce, University of Delhi, and she holds an MBA in management from IIM Bangalore. Welcome, Shavita. Last but not the least, let me introduce Mr. Saurav Banerjee. I don't know, I mean, since he's running the show, I guess everybody knows him, but let me introduce him all the same. Let me first say that I've had the privilege of working with Saurav at Usaid. We were colleagues at Usaid, and amazing person to work with. Saurav is the country director of Room to Read India. Saurav has been instrumental in shaping the growth of Room to Read in India and scaling up its programs in collaboration with governments, and if I may add, also with donors such as Usaid. He brings in a high level of strategic thinking and a strong desire to bring systemic change in education. Saurav has over 25 years of experience in the elementary education sector, working for government, non-government, and donor organizations. Before Room to Read, Saurav worked with USAID, where he led conceptualizing, designing, and managing education and skill development activities. Prior to USAID, he was closely associated with the initial planning, implementation, and monitoring of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Saurav has participated in various program review missions as a nominee of the Government of India and the World Bank, and has served in multiple government committees at different points in time. By training, Saurav is an architect, and he practiced architecture before moving into education. So we have a collective education sector experience on the dais of well over 100 years in this very, very distinguished panel of 4. And I'm sure that we'll gain tremendously from their expertise, experience, wisdom, and insights. And just so all of us have a sense of time, so that we don't overrun our time, we could perhaps take about 5 to 6 minutes on each of the questions that we discuss in the panel. So someone has said, and I quote, and I don't know who it is, but someone has said, there's only one thing that could replace a book, and that is the next book. And I couldn't agree more, you know. And I feel, why must children not have access to good quality literature, books, storytelling, just as adults need to or do have? So let's dive right into the discussion on books, literature, stories, and storytelling, and why they are important for learning. Thank you, Dee. So let me first move to Dr. Dee Jingra, who's sitting right next to me. Can you hear me well now? Okay, all right. Dr. Jingra, I think the first question that I'd like to put to you is, you know, we in the education community always keep talking about the need to, the need for good literature, the need for storytelling, et cetera, in terms of, you know, development of foundational learning skills among children, early grades especially. Now, would you take some time to explain why is it so? How do these help in promoting or enhancing learning, or even other aspects of a child's development?
Thank you, Madhu. Can I speak from there? Yeah, okay. Would be to give me a little more time on the first question. I will, if there is a second question, I'll take less time. Obviously, you can say, you said 100 years, right? An ancient panel here. If you add Madhu, then we are probably crossing 130, 140 years. But I'll try and respond a little bit with an academic dimension to this. I think it's important to understand what is our definition of literacy development. Broadly, literacy consists of two bundles of skills. One is called constrained skills, which is phonological awareness, letter recognition, letter sound association, some things that can be mastered through systematic instruction in 2 or 3 years. The other side, which is equally important, is what we call unconstrained skills: oral language, vocabulary, critical thinking, composition, etc. And these are more meaning-based and more multi-dimensional in nature and keep developing throughout life. And the means of developing these unconstrained skills initially in the early years is basically oral discussion, storytelling, read-alouds with a lot of discussion, reading and thinking in groups, drawing, composing, etc. And all of these require different levels and nature of texts and active engagement of children. So if we were to consider literacy as constrained and unconstrained skills, there's no way but to use a lot of children's literature to develop these unconstrained skills in a lifelong manner. And ORF, which we talk about a lot nowadays, sits somewhere in the middle of constrained and unconstrained. It is, of course, automaticity in word recognition, but even this is really developed through regular reading of simple texts. So again, it is about having good children's literature books in the classroom or materials. So that's my first argument. The second is about, again, coming to what consumes all of us and the state governments that we work with, is learning outcomes, right? And learning outcomes in language and literacy is usually what everyone cares for, is reading comprehension, let's say, whether it's NAS or now even the FLN study that's happened. Now, as we all know, reading comprehension is a product of two, that simple view of reading, all of us know, it's basically word recognition and language comprehension, right? And language comprehension, a proxy that is often used is listening comprehension. Often used. I mean, there is a difference. A lot of brain imaging and empirical studies have shown that there is a huge correlation between listening comprehension and reading comprehension, almost 50%. Of course, there are differences, and that is because reading fluency is a very important factor in reading comprehension. Now, what this means is that comprehension is like a general comprehension. There is some theory of general comprehension, which means basically that, sorry if I'm using some high-sounding words, but very simple, cognitive processing, anything, processing of inputs that come either as auditory inputs or visual inputs happens in a similar manner, especially if you're talking of higher order comprehension. So very important to remember that listening comprehension and reading comprehension are highly correlated. And if we could work on listening comprehension development in the early years, vocabulary, higher order critical thinking, sentence structure, narration, these will all be crucial for reading comprehension. And how are they all done? This is done in the initial years, not through reading. Children do not read at that time. So a lot of read aloud and discussion based on written texts, because the idea is to familiarize children with the written language. One of the most important factors of reading comprehension is background knowledge, right? And background knowledge you cannot develop in children by getting them to read a lot in grades 1 to 3. You can do that a lot by oral discussion, extended conversation, etc. For example, training them in why did this happen? What do you think happened here? What is your opinion about this? And all of this requires text. So that is my second argument, that listening comprehension, which lies at the base of reading comprehension, can be supported very strongly by availability of children's literature in the classroom. The third, and I'll just go quickly over this, we know a lot of children come from very deprived and low literacy environments. There's little exposure to books, no read-alouds at home. Even more importantly, in many households, there is either not enough conversation, or the conversation does not include a lot of high complex vocabulary, does not include reasoning, does not include often decontextualized language, sort of abstract language. Now, when children come to school, they need to be prepared for what they're going to encounter in the textbooks. So a lot of this can be done in the initial months and years by read alouds, conversation, using vocabulary, sentence structures, decontextualized language, all of it through written language, but maybe it's spoken initially. Teachers find it easier to do this through written text. It can be done through extended conversation also, but it's easier. So that's my third argument, that children who come from deprived, low literacy environments need this buffer of being read aloud to be able to encounter written language a lot before they have to read it. The fourth point is that, and this was mentioned by Madhu here, that in the last part of her question, that what else? We are all talking about reading skills, but as the NEP and Nipun Bharat say, that there's a lot to early development than just academic or cognitive skills. Physical and motor development, ethical values, socio-emotional development, art and aesthetics. That's what the NEP is talking about. Now, if we were to choose a variety of children's literature and get children to respond to it, to express their opinions, feelings, imagination, creativity, they talk, they read, draw, write, role play, if all that can be integrated as a part of a literacy class, rather than saying literacy is all about just, to be able to read and write, then a lot of these holistic dimensions of learning are going to be fulfilled because there are books in the classroom. And I end by saying that our textbooks today do not provide those opportunities. And that is why there's a strong need for children's literature. They take literacy instruction very seriously. Our textbooks, often they don't do it very well. That's another problem. There is a sentence that I love reading out sometimes. It's from a textbook that is hopefully now moving out. Nrip, we don't know, many of you may not know what Nrip is. Nrip ने कृषक पर कृपा की और उसे पुरस्कृत किया जिससे कृषक की तृप्ति हो गई. All of this is oriented towards teaching that one re, right? So all of the texts are, a lot of texts are like that. So I just feel that, as we all do, that we develop a lot of graded reading texts in the classroom to help children proceed from one reading skill level to another and another. And then we say there is children's literature for enjoyment. I argue for reducing the gap between these two. Can material that is there for developing reading skills and what we call authentic children's literature come closer? And therefore we use texts, even shorter texts that are very interesting, lend themselves to thinking and higher order comprehension, and we do not talk about these two as very different. Have some meeting ground between them. So those were my 5 arguments for why children's literature is so crucial for literacy development in the broader understanding of what literacy development is. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jingra. I think that was very, very well explained. I think all of us have got a hang of why and how. Let me now move to Dr. Chavan, and staying with the national education policy that Dr. Jingran referred to. Not that educationists didn't know it before, but the policy emphasizes the role and significance of good quality storybooks, vibrant libraries, and a storytelling-based pedagogy. Yet we don't see much evidence of it in our classrooms. Why do you think that's the case? Is it that there's a lack of awareness among schools and teachers? Is it sheer reluctance on the part of teachers to use those methodologies? Or is it, like in the case of reading materials and books, is it other constraints such as shortage of funds, etc.? But more importantly, what can be done to rectify this situation?
This has to be a very short answer. It's the same reason why people don't want the children to play and they want them to study. So there is something called a curriculum, there is something called a career, and we all think that if you go to school and learn well, get good marks, study hard, then your life is great. And nothing is great. what you're talking about is the idea of what education and learning is. I understand that the meaning of the word education is upbringing. It has nothing to, very little to do with the kinds of things that we associate with education. And what has happened is we've handed all the upbringing to the school. And the curriculum is what is the upbringing. And that is wrong. It is just plain wrong. And that has influenced us and generations before us, saying that this is what schooling is, this is what education is, and this is what you should learn. When we were growing up, among the 100 years of education experience that we have, it was very clear. हम खेलने जाते थे तो लोग कहते थे खेल के क्या होगा तेरा कुछ नहीं होने वाला पढ़ाई करो तो नौकरी धंधा मिलेगा. And I tried to do that to some my nephews and nieces also. And then Sachin Tendulkar came around. And then people started playing in IPL and then Kabaddi, and they started saying, look, we can make careers out of it. आप लोग हो कहाँ पे? So I think the same thing about storytelling also. We have said कि ये क्या कहानी वानी क्या इसकी क्या ज़रूरत है? We have not paid attention to childhood. We have not paid attention to upbringing. We have not looked at how we enjoyed our nani stories, and we thought that that was not learning. Dheer has expounded very well on the subject. So I don't think there is that much to say. But what can be done about it is yes, we have to now say children need to decide what they want to do. What if children decide they don't want to learn science? What will you do? And they, in a way they do decide that. क्योंकि आप लोग इम्तिहान लेते हो हमको फेल करते हो अभी तो फेल भी नहीं कर सकते 10वीं तो सभी को पास करनी है. So what is all this? I think we need to focus and rethink the whole situation. We, for example, we've been doing some Vigyan Mitra experiments, and what we find is that the kids love to do things, make things with their hands. But if you ask them कि इसके पीछे science क्या है तो बोलते हैं वो छोड़ दो यार ये हमको करने में मजा आ रहा है. Now, pedagogy शब्द है तो इसको कैसे करें? How am I going to teach a child about physics? Not everything can be done with hands. We find that the stories of scientists, at least the old scientists, not the newer ones, are very entertaining and encouraging also. कि ये कौन थे, कैसे हुए scientists, कहाँ से आए, इनका encouragement, inspiration कहाँ से आया. And actually now, even now, these movies that we see these days, biopics about scientists, those are also. So there are very different pathways to learning that we can follow. And stories and storytelling is definitely one of them. If we say that storytelling is not a part of learning, then everything is gone and finished. So, and also, how to tell stories is a big art. हम लोग समझते हैं कि ऐसे कहानी पढ़ाओ, कथा पढ़ाओ तो हो जाएगा, वो वैसे नहीं होता है. स्टोरी टेलिंग एज आर्ट, आजकल मूवीज भी मतलब अभी बॉम्ब हो रहे हैं वो छोड़ो, but storytelling is definitely an art that has to be developed, and we don't develop it. There is a lot missing in our schools, our education, and our curriculum. And storytelling in literature, as you talked about, is definitely missing. How do you create literature of children? Rukmini Banerjee, who was supposed to be here, I'm a substitute actually, I think. So she talks. So Rukmini often says, she claims when it's convenient, she says she's from Patna and Bihar. But otherwise she says, I'm a Bengali, and in Bengali literature, all the greats of Bengal, or great authors of Bengal, have written children's stories and children's literature. And whether that is true of other languages, we don't know. But that is true, that the language is made simpler, written simply, etc., etc. So why can't we encourage writing for children? And a lot of people do that. I remember a long time back, I had challenged when I was working in adult literacy, not the Pratham avatar of mine. We wanted neo-literates to read. And what we found was for literature for neo-literates was all about health and how to look after your children and nutrition. हमने कहा ये न्यू लिटरेट्स हैं, कोई 20 साल के 25 साल के, इनके लिए प्रेम कहानी नहीं हो सकती। तो वो प्रेम कहानी नहीं हो सकती, न्यू लिटरेट्स को प्रेम कहानी, तौबा तौबा, ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है? कैन यू हैव अ सास बहू की कहानी? उस जमाने में ये सास भी कभी बहू थी नहीं थी। और तब जब हम ये कह रहे थे तब लोग कह रहे थे ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है, घर में झगड़ा हो जाएगा। अरे वो तो टीवी पे इतना पॉपुलर हो गया फॉर्मूला। सो आई थिंक आवर कंसेप्ट ऑफ व्हाट लर्निंग इज एंड व्हाट फ्रॉम व्हाट पीपल कैन लर्न, वो नहीं होता है। मैंने उस जमाने में, मुझे याद है, मैंने कहा 10,000 रुपया लो, दैट वाज गॉड नोज व्हेन, 1990-91। बोर्डिया साहब वाज माय इंस्पिरेशन एट दैट टाइम। 10,000 रुपया लो, बाजार में जाओ और मुझे 10,000 रुपये की किताबें लेके आओ जो न्यू लिटरेट्स के पढ़ने लायक है या बच्चों के पढ़ने लायक है। इन मुंबई, इन मराठी, दैट्स व्हाट आई वांटेड। They could not get books worth 10,000 rupees. Maybe it's lack of rupees now, but say 1 lakh रुपया दे दो, I am sure Room to Read can do this experiment, कि लोकल लैंग्वेज में आपको 1 लाख रुपये की किताबें मिल सकती हैं क्या? 1 लाख नहीं, चल 10,000 का ले लो यार, सो इन्फ्लेशन एडजस्टमेंट कर लेना बाद में। You will find that these are not available. Why? Because this is in local languages, publishers will not go. What is a print run of a local language? प्रथम बुक्स जब हमने शुरू किया तब भी वही सवाल था। प्रथम बुक्स, there are some people from प्रथम बुक्स here, I don't know how many, what is a print run of a प्रथम बुक्स book? 2,000 की 5,000. What is this? In a country like India, is that the print run you give? Because publishers से हम लोग नहीं कर सकते। Market, we have to do something about the market. There is a market solution. Libraries तो government ज़रूर कर सकती है, very good. But ultimately, किताबें कहाँ से आएंगी? And if you don't create a market for it, it will not work. And how will you create a market? I think we had gone to Usaid about some grants, but Madhu, you I think shot it down. So maybe. No. This was about creating a market for children's books. कैसे करोगे? I better stop. In Bihar, they did this experiment. Anjani Babu was the education secretary or whatever, कि सारी स्कूलों को कहा गया कि आपको ये पैसा दिया गया है, आप लेके खरीद के स्कूल में लेके आओ। The same thing. And it was a tough task to get books to various locations in Bihar, but teachers went with the money, bought the books and brought them to school, and they were told कि इसको अभी यूज़ कर लो। अब उसमें भी बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम्स हैं। सो लुक, मार्केट का सवाल है, स्कूल का सवाल है। अभी somebody was talking about that Karnataka schools and libraries, कि you should give children digital devices to handle. हमारा यहाँ पे ये प्रॉब्लम होता है कि स्कूल में अगर किताब दी तो हाथ नहीं लगाना ज़्यादा, वो ख़राब हो जाएंगी तो फिर उसका क्या होगा? I think there is a lot of things that we need to correct. But anyway, first things first, children should be encouraged to play and enjoy.
Thank you, Dr. Chavan. That was brilliant, but thank you also for stopping, because you were stealing the thunder away from some of the subsequent questions and their answers. So thank you. Let me now turn to Shavita. And Shavita, let me pick your brains about how to create a literary environment in the classroom. If we look at the primary school system in India in its entirety, we are talking about something like 8.5 lakh schools, and so well over 40 lakh primary school classrooms. Now, what sort of provisions can be suggested to the government for ensuring that despite the dearth of children's literature, quality children's literature, that students engage in good literary work in the literacy and language classrooms?
Madhu spoke about how will I follow up Madhav's eloquent response, but I think specifically on this question, Madhu, when Uma ma'am was presenting the initiative that they were able to take in Karnataka, and the scale that they took it to with 20 lakh students, I think that's the best example of how government can actually make reading books available and add to that environment for literacy learning. A again, right, Dheer explained in, he gave us a narrative on how there are strong technical reasons why we need additional reading material, literature in classrooms over and above our textbooks, which are very curriculum, very pedagogy, like Madhav said, padhoge to career banega kind of, there's a very linear way of thinking, which is syllabus completion, which is definitely not adequate in how we are defining literacy. And to me, it's honestly a life skill. It's not that I have to read to understand science, but to conduct, and for all of us, right? I think most of us in this room are a generation where we only realized the importance of comprehension and communication very late in life. We were so busy, wo jo rote learning hai, read, lagao a ratta, get a good score, and you progress in life. And when you start adult interaction, when we all start working, we realize the importance of communication, and you can't communicate without comprehension. How do we start building that environment early on when the brain is still developing, and how do you then make it a life skill, a life habit? The good news is now with the focus of early learning under NEP, Nipun, the FLN mission in India, is making explicit funding provision for teaching learning material. The policy, the mission says 500 rupees per child. Last year, because of COVID, I think the provision that was made available was only 300. It is a good start, but it's only a start, right? I think we also realize in our country, policy is the beginning of change. It cannot be the end of change. Now, state governments have to get that money available under PAB, and hopefully, Madhav, this becomes the start of that marketplace. Because it's a chicken and egg, right? I have funding, but if I go out and I want to procure that, is there good literature available? I mean, of course, we know there are Katha books, there's Room to Read books, the whole Story Weaver, Pratham book series, LLF and all their material builds incredible reading material to support that language learning in the classroom. But I think how do you complete that cycle of, because funding is available, there it should generate a supply of high quality literature in the local languages, in the state languages, availing that funding. And I think a big part of that will need to be to also simplify procurement. Funding is the start of resources available here. And then there is, okay, do I have good quality literature available? But the whole government procurement process also needs to be more simplified and, to be honest, made less corrupt. I think that's a big challenge of where a lot of that funding will then, worst case, go unutilized. And I mean, the last point I'll make on this is it's not just funding and it's not the demand supply of the marketplace, but I think the practice of teachers then being able to use it in the classroom. It's not a library jo stairs ke niche hai, tala laga ke rakh diya hai, and kids are not allowed to issue, right? It's how do you make those reading corners within a classroom? How does how the teaching of the language uses those stories beyond just using the textbooks. So I think even ensuring the behavioral change that we'll need from teachers to start using this as core teaching learning material, and it's not, an afterthought.
Thank you, Shavita. Let me now turn to Saurav, and let's talk about a slightly different area of work. Of course, as we know, many studies have indicated that, when teachers are using a variety of storytelling techniques in the classroom and engaging children in literature, and especially doing reading aloud and activities of that nature, they are actually modeling to the students the pleasure of reading, because they then are presenting to the students new information, rich vocabulary, good grammar, etc. Yet, as we've been discussing, we don't see this happening in the classrooms. Now, do you think, and this is perhaps because our primary school teachers are not given enough skills, enough training, enough guidance on how to engage children with literature. Now, do you think that the situation can be changed if we may bring about a change in teacher development and teacher training spaces?
Yeah, I don't think I'll get into the details of teacher training and processes and modules and all. I mean, especially if you have people like Subir in the next panel who are like experts on this. What I will basically talk about is the kind of challenges we find with teachers as we implement literacy programs. I think the first point is the whole thing that Dheer explained of why literature is important for literacy acquisition. The basic knowledge of that is lacking across the system, especially with teachers. Now, if you look at a teacher's journey, I mean, if you start with pre-service teacher training, you go to a diet, you go to a B.Ed college, there's hardly any discussion on children's literature on those spaces. Forget discussion, if you go to a diet, you don't even find a well-stocked library in a diet. Even if there's a library, it's stocked with books of pedagogy and child psychology and stuff like that. I mean, if I'm a teacher teaching primary grades, I don't get access to children's literature. How do I even understand where the child is and how do I interact with the child? So I think a large gap exists there itself as we train teachers to become teachers. And then once you get into the profession, when you are a teacher, and there are a plethora of in-service teacher training programs that we do under SSA and various schemes. And there we see two kinds of gaps. There's a gap at the knowledge level and there's a gap at the practice level. So at the knowledge level, again, the whole thing about how still literacy acquisition is about doing the textbook. At the most, a structured lesson plan is what teachers would do. The linkage of literature, oral reading comprehension, oral language in literacy acquisition is still not understood. So even at a knowledge level. And then you go to the practice level, you have all these issues of, one, there is no children's literature available in the classroom. And it's not a question of books only. I mean, books is definitely very important. But many a times teachers can actually create reading materials within the classroom. Even that is not actively encouraged or supported. So at a practice level also you see a classroom which is bereft of any kind of reading material. So the child's exposure to text is very minimal. And then you have larger mindset issues of things like, you know, what Madhav was talking about, ki kitabe hain to you are not supposed to touch the books. Or the child, if you, I mean, the worst case is you kind of train teachers on read aloud. And the read aloud is done in a way, it almost looks like reading out a textbook lesson. And you have 10 questions at the end of a read aloud. So it kind of puts off the child from even liking a text in the first place, liking a book in the first place. So those are deep-rooted mindset things which takes ages to kind of work. And you have to work almost very closely, almost coaching, mentoring teachers to kind of get them out of that mindset, which can be done effectively through a BRC, CRC academic coaching system, which again is par optimal in most states. So we have a situation where neither are teachers, while they prepare them, they are not talked about, they are not trained about literature and literacy linkages. In the knowledge that you impart to them in service, that's also not featuring, and definitely not at the practice level. So, I mean, obviously any teacher training capacity building system would probably have to address all of these three causes. And I'm sure, as I said, Subir and others are better people to talk about what those training modules should look like, really.
Thank you, Saurabh. You know, and talking of coaching, mentoring, etc., at least I know that Room to Read has been doing it extensively, LLF has been doing extensively, and many on the floor on the other side have also been doing it. I don't know how much of it sustains, you know, once you all withdraw, and you can't be there forever. So I think the government system will have to gear up to it, or we need to look at our ways of, you know, are we drilling it deep enough for it to sustain? So, but anyway, thank you, Saurabh. Let me come back to Dr. Jingra on another question, and let's once again look at the NEP. vis-a-vis its emphasis on mother tongue-based or home language-based instruction. It definitely emphasizes on that, especially in the early years. Mother tongue-based instruction, as well as learning materials, literature access in those languages. However, you know, if there is a dearth of children's literature in standard languages, this is even greater in tribal languages, regional languages, local languages. So how does one encourage the publishing of a wide range of children's literature in a number of non-standard languages, I mean all non-standard languages if possible? And more importantly, and I think Dr. Chavan referred to it, how does one ensure that there is a good market for it to make it viable for publishers? Otherwise, we keep talking about it and it doesn't really happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Madhu. I prefer to call them non-dominant languages rather than non-standard. So yes, that's very true that some of the languages we work with, for example, Wagdi, Gondi, Halbi, there's very little literature that's useful for the classroom, but it is possible to develop. So I think the first stage is to how do you develop good literature? Lots of folk tales and rhymes and what's local knowledge about the culture that's available, which through a variety of ways, workshops, getting communities to come together, can be documented. And then, of course, to be put into a shape which is appropriate for the primary stages. So I think, and there are some guidelines that we have developed, others have developed. Room to Read has done a lot of work in this also. So it is possible to develop literature, and I think what I have been arguing for is a national children's literature development program in the non-dominant languages. That's something which is not about giving 500 rupees per child or per school. It's something which has to be taken up nationally and then for every state, which is an investment that has to be made, which is really absolutely crucial. The second part of it, as you said, for publishers, I think everyone said here that initially it is the government which has to provide those numbers, whether it is for classrooms or for community libraries. There's a lot of scope. In Bastar, for example, Bastar district in Chhattisgarh, there are about 50,000 children from an Halbi language-speaking background. And even if we were not to introduce Halbi as the medium of instruction and use this mainly for read-alouds and for poems and posters, there's a huge market. If we were to try and say that this has to be done, the question then is procurement, what Shweta mentioned, that the government, I mean, for example, in Haryana, we tried for 2 years, the government could not procure 1 lakh worth of books from identified publishers, because they said single source and their audit will not allow. Question is that, and they prefer to then go to the textbook press and to their own printing or ask Room to Read, LLF, etc. to provide books. We've got to break that. So there's chicken, there's like, what did you say the chicken was? So there's availability of resources, there's funding. The third dimension, chicken feed or something you can call it, which is how do you procure books? And I think if private publishers get a guarantee that we are going to buy, 50,000 children into, say, 2 or 3 titles per child, then it's like you're talking of lakhs of books for 1 language. If they get a guarantee, initially at least, and this is a fixed price for which you will supply for this, and then you can sell outside the market also. If we can evolve mechanisms of doing this, I'm sure there will be a demand in several languages. But yes, we've got to think of innovative mechanisms, RFPs, etc., whatever is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jingran. If I may just add a couple of things to that. One is just a thought that, there are a whole lot of innovators here and there who are developing children's literature in various languages. And then there's the government who can easily take it to various schools. some of you may have already approached donors, but I think donors can play an important third-party role here, where all three can come together and make sure, that if the government is not able to fund it fully, can the donors come in and support that, and there can be a three-way arrangement. So that's one. The other is, while I was at Usaid, there was a global initiative that Usaid started on, I'm forgetting the exact name, but something like tracking books or something. I'm forgetting the exact name. Balaka may remember what was the name of the initiative that talked about moving books, right up to the school level in a way in which the corrupt practices can be checked. So, so there was that initiative. So things of that nature can perhaps be, fallen back upon. But thank you, Dr. Jingran, once again. Let me now turn to Dr. Chavan for what might be, not really, but a bit of an abstraction right now. But yeah, many of us have already talked about it today. See, if we look at the definition of literacy, foundational literacy, we do still primarily hinge, the definition hinges around fluency and comprehension most of the time. But when we add the dimension of exposure to books and diverse texts, etc., other concepts, automatically come in, and this has started creeping into the discourse, as you heard today also. So concepts such as information processing, critical thinking, imagination, creativity, socio-emotional development, etc. So do you believe it's time that we started broadening the definition of literacy, foundational literacy, etc., and also started broadening the assessments accordingly? So we assess literacy for each of these aspects rather than that very narrow definition of assessing, fluency and comprehension, etc. What do you say? Where do you see this going in the future?
I think we need to acknowledge that literacy has expanded already. What we thought was literacy, I think the world has gone beyond that. And we need to understand that. I mean, there are these, what you described, the definition of literacy, or what we generally describe is classical definition of literacy. The other day, I saw a kid actually hold a smartphone and use his voice to search YouTube. Okay? So he's not even typing things, he's just using the voice prompt. Does that fit into literacy? Well, he's doing two things. He's telling the machine to search and he's thinking of what to search. That's going beyond simple information processing, I think. So I would say, without prolonging the answer, we need to understand literacy better now. And we have gone beyond the original literacy and how we can understand the new literacy. For example, I was a very, shall we say, I was a purist. I still am. When you speak Hindi, you speak Hindi. You don't mix English. So I didn't like Hinglish. I didn't like Minglish. But now the children are surrounded by mixed languages. We have to recognize that pure Hindi is impossible for the child to hear. Hear, read, everything is still pure. And so how does that fit into our understanding of literacy now and what the child is going to learn? So I'll stop there. I've used too much time earlier, so I'll stop now.
Thank you. Shavita, we've referred to socio-emotional development of children, but perhaps in passing. I think that's an area that needs a much greater focus. The pandemic situation has receded a bit, but I'm not sure it's totally gone and that we're not going to get more waves or other such eventualities. Now, we also know that it has played havoc on children's social-emotional development, cognitive development, the works. So do you think that if a culture of storytelling in a variety of different ways as well as, and I think perhaps even more importantly, listening to children's voices, their thoughts, their experiences, their feelings, as part of, of the daily teaching, learning process in the classroom. If such a culture is made an integral part of the classrooms, do you think we'll be better prepared for these eventualities and we'll be able to mitigate at least some of the huge learning loss that has occurred now or in the future?
No, completely agree, Madhu. And I think COVID has brought to the forefront a need which always existed, right? I mean, we've used different terms. In a way, 21st century life skills became a catch-all phrase, right? What is not hard-coded, cognitive, or even like Madhav said, there's this purest definition of the cognitive, the way the cognitive brain and those skills, which we can then assess and measure, and everything else started getting classified as 21st century. Though they are so integrated and interdependent, you can't develop one without the other. And especially, I mean, again, right, I think where we are in our journey as a country with issues such as social emotional, they are getting solved with all due regards in a mission mode with a zero period, right? Once a week, there'll be a workshop, or once a month, there'll be some interaction in social emotional. Let's take any one example. Let's take teamwork. Let's take gender sensitivity. Will a young mind understand it, comprehend it, take it with her as a life learning only because we talk about it maybe 6 times in an academic year? Or if it gets integrated into how language is being taught? To me, Madhu, the question on storytelling, narrative, listening to the children, right? If we can, and everything that we are talking about literature, Dheer also spoke about the relevance, right? They have to be relevant to the background of where the children are coming from. From simple things like what are the pictures or imagery used, whether in our textbooks or in our literature. What is the conversation around, I mean, a skill like empathy, you can only learn it when you observe it, when you see it in practice. Can our stories start bringing those out? Can that encourage a conversation with the child? आपने कभी ये देखा है? आपको, asking children to share their experiences of, has somebody been empathetic to them? Have they been empathetic? Or if you pick that as a theme through a story and the child comes back and shares that experience. So I think, to me, COVID has highlighted an issue which we already were experiencing as a society. Life is becoming more complex. Whether it's digital, whether it's COVID, could be another thing tomorrow. I'm just coming from a workshop at my children's school on, I mean, the word we are using with digital is addiction. We are no longer saying digital for, it's not a plus one. It's so integral to all our lives. I think most of us in this room have been looking at our phones alongside. It's become second nature, right? The rate at which life is evolving, the way society is changing, addressing these becomes super critical, but rather than do a once a month workshop, if these conversations get integrated into how the children are interacted with on a regular basis, integrating that, weaving it into the literature, the story, the narrative, the conversations we have in classroom with children is the only way to solve it for the long term.
Thank you, Shavita. Finally, let me once again turn to Saurav. And let's talk about the larger community of education stakeholders, Saurav. How do you think an awareness be spread about the importance and role of literature in literacy classrooms, as well as how to make it a reality amongst all of the education stakeholders, be it parents, civil society organizations, donors, schools and universities, and other willing partners?
Yeah, that's a tough challenge actually. But so on the awareness level, I think a couple of things. One is to get more and more stakeholders involved in the process. As you just mentioned about, say, donors is one group who can play a very facilitating role in. So say at one level, it's also a demand-supply gap, as Madhav mentioned. Publishers don't publish because there's no demand, because you cannot publish a certain print run for the market. Demand is not, and you go to, on the demand side, if you look at it, you often find a situation where there's not adequate books available in the market in the first place. So we kind of, struggling, we are stuck in this demand-supply cycle. And I think other stakeholders, like say donors, is one, definitely a group who can come and start breaking this. Government is the key stakeholder on that. If government starts demanding good literature, I think the publishers would be even willing to publish more. Now, where does government demand start from? I mean, the government institutes the think tanks. I don't think there's anyone from NCRT here today, but NCRT, SCRT, if they start messaging it out of the importance of literature, importance of children's literature and illiteracy, I think a lot of that momentum starts getting built up. As organizations, as civil society organizations, we are trying our best to kind of, develop some books, do some book collection exercises, get publishers on board, talk to publishers, develop programs, training programs or around, literature and literacy. But those would serve only a limited purpose. The other stakeholder on this is probably universities and academic institutions, including SCRTs, DIETs, and others. Room to Read has been trying to engage with the Doon University, for example, to try and see if there can be courses on children's literature and more courses. I mean, there are only a few available now. To talk to SCRTs to see if, again, as I said, children's literature knowledge and practices of children's literature can actually be built into pre-service courses and pre-service curriculum rather than trying to address them at an in-service stage. So I think a multitude of things, academic institutions, donors, governments, plus civil society organizations, what we're doing. We are also trying to we have talked enough about this procurement, the government bureaucratic systems and how that becomes an impediment on the larger promotion of children's literature, and try to break through that, try to see if we can get teachers to start writing about it and SCRTs to develop more children's literature. I mean, none of the SCRTs actually publish books. Why can't they? I mean, they can start doing that with obviously it has to follow a process and we can kind of support that process. So we're trying to do all of that. We're just hoping that all of these will come together to change the situation, but I think it's a collective effort that everyone has to take to change this situation that exists.
Thank you, Saurabh. Just wanted to check, has Room to Read kind of taken away the embargo on its books, to be used by other people at large? Can they buy your books or?
So what we have done is, of course, our books, we definitely get print right of our books to governments. That has been done earlier also. Recently, we have entered into agreement with a few co-publishers who would publish our books for the market. But that's a limited, that's not all the books that we have. It's only dependent on what the co-publisher wants to publish. But so in a way, certain extent, but not fully probably.
Right. So thank you for doing that. And, my request will be that since you are among the very, very few publishers, so to say, of good children's literature, try and do as much as possible to take away the embargo completely. Likewise for all others who are publishing and have embargoes. The other little point that I'd like to add here is, in addition to all that Saurabh said, I mean, I think, and I think we say this all the time, but are somehow not able to achieve it, unless there is demand from the communities and votes are won by politicians based on a demand for quality education, for good children's literature, et cetera, very little is likely to change. So I think when we do our campaigns, when we do whatever in terms of, reading campaigns, et cetera, which Room to Read has been doing for a number of years now. Pratham started their reading efforts, I think maybe 25 years ago, so, when nobody was talking about it in India. So, I mean, I think when we do those campaigns, when we are with the communities, I think we have to also encourage them to start demanding it at the village level, at the Gram Panchayat level, at all levels. So, I mean, I think that might make a difference also. So thank you, all four of you. I'd just like to end by saying that, we do have a National Reading Day in India, like in many other countries, but I don't know how many of us are even aware of it. There is a World Book Day or a World Reading Day. Now, most of them just come and go. There's no buzz around them. I don't think enough is done, except, of course, as I said, I've seen Room to Read, maybe because from Usaid I was closely associated with their work. So, I mean, I think part of the answer to the question that I asked Saurav is maybe in these campaigns also we need to engage many, many more stakeholders, so that the word spreads everywhere in the country and right down to the last community in the last village. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening patiently. Thank you.
Yes, we can take a couple of questions.
All right, that's really, really sweet of the organizers. They tell us that there is time to take a couple of questions. So if anybody has any questions from the floor, please raise your hand.
I see a hand at the back. Okay, Poonam, we'll... all right. Okay.
Hello. Okay, so first of all, thank you to all of you for such a good discussion, and it's rare to get you guys here together on a podium to talk. My question is from all of you. We have talked about creating market demand for good books. But what I have observed that the section of the society who can actually afford books, there's a section who cannot, they don't have that privilege, but the section who can actually afford books or influence the market in terms of creating demand is actually demanding for something specific type of products. If I say in a crude manner, ready-to-use products, which can, as per general thought, can directly support their children in beating this cutthroat competition, going through the competitive exams and all that. They want such kind of products directly. Now, the question is that a right trend? And if it is not, why after so many initiatives, the message has not reached clearly about importance of reading or importance of books? Why haven't we been able to create that message in the society, or that section particularly, who can actually afford books or create demand? That is the question.
Maybe I'll get started. No, so I think, with your permission, I'll disassociate the issue, right? I mean, of course, there are, irrespective of affordability, there's a whole test prep market in India. And I think let's just accept it and leave it where it belongs. I mean, with your permission, right? I'm saying maybe that how do you crack FITGI and NEET and how do you get into the preferred university? That is a whole different ecosystem. And that honestly, in most cases, only kicks in high school. I know FITGI coaching now also starts at grade 6. But typically, the way test prep is understood is high school onwards. I think the focus of everything that got discussed today, or even the theme of the thing, is specifically literacy for younger children. Again, from my perspective, where it gets lopsided is segments which can afford end up, the demand is for English literature. So titles which are getting released in Amazon worldwide, the mid-income to high-income parents wanted for their children in India at the same time. Advanced booking for Harry Potter, for example, right? So there I see the constraint of demand is more English. And I think Dheer gave us the contrast of the under-demonstrated languages can still, if the intent is to adequately provide, then the print run that will be required still runs into lakhs. But there, how do does the parent even understand the role that books can play in their children's education and learning? I think that is the gap, which, again, I think Saurav also spoke about how all stakeholders need to come together to solve it. Or Madhu, when you referred to unless people start demanding quality education. And then for them to begin to understand that quality education mein books ka actually bahut bada role hai. That's the gap that needs to be solved, and hence that collective surround sound or buzz on किताबों के बिना बच्चे सीखेंगे नहीं, समझेंगे नहीं, आगे बढ़ेंगे नहीं is what needs to be created. I don't know if somebody else wants to build on this.
All right. Okay, so we just have time for one more question, and we have quite a few raised hands, but would you like? All right, okay. So maybe, all right, sorry to interrupt. So maybe we can take 2-3 questions and the panel will try to answer you collectively, right?
Thanks so much. Nice to see you here, Mike. I just had a question on, as a donor, we've been working in this area for quite some time.
You're still audible, Poonam, but for others to hear.
Thank you. So, we look for sustainability, something you're leaving behind, and long-term impact, which and children are some of the most important, I think, development beneficiaries we like to work with, right? Given all of that, we've looked at many, many different models, and literacy, of course. I remember when I was growing up, I had to hide my book from my mother, because she would say, oh, you're wasting your time, why aren't you studying? And I'm talking about fiction, right? And she thought anything outside the textbook is not acceptable. So things have grown a lot since then. So when I was looking at the morning Uma's presentation in Karnataka, I was just absolutely impressed, just like, because it addressed the need for community engagement, it addressed local governance, it addressed literacy needs, and just total participation, which is sustainable. And my question to you, and also because they had all these innovative elements added to it, like, who's the best in this, adding in a carom board, whatever it is, there were lots of different things. So without making it longer, my question to all of you, esteemed panel, would be, I think there's a little bit of the government element that program did work in the rural development, not in the education department, but that's not everything. That cannot be. So why can't similar programs be implemented through all the programs that we are doing so they become more sustainable and effective? And maybe maybe what I've seen is the cream, and there may be other elements in it. So I would love to hear your views on what you thought about the program. Why do you think it is a sustainable model, and how we could together take it forward, things like this. So just a very quick overview would be very helpful. Thank you.
The front table, Yashika. Yeah. We'll just take 2 more questions.
So, I agree to whatever all the discussions was happening, and we are talking a lot about sustainability. And when I think about this idea of sustainability of the habit of reading, and there I feel that we all work in the domain of this elementary, primary reading habit, which is like more about foundational reading and writing skills. But what are we doing about sustaining the habit of reading in later grades? For example, like as a society, do we really appreciate the habit of reading as elders, as adults? And do we create those spaces? And especially when we talk about school, I feel that we have the amount of literature that is available for early grades, primary grades. I think whatever is there is not being consumed, because there is a lot. If you look at the Children's Book Trust and National Book Trust, and then Eklavya, Ektara, Room to Read, Pratham, there are so many there. Katha and all are like, they are slightly expensive books and probably may not be available for all the school children which we are talking about. But after primary, I see there's a serious dearth of literature for children, and then for school and college goers, like there is literature, and then the discourses in the literature community, which is writing literature and the people who are reading literature, that becomes very specific. But this habit of reading, which goes on forever, I feel that that also is missing, and probably that is one of the important aspects of sustaining the habit of reading, and then have a society which can actually appreciate their children to have the habit of reading as well. So I don't know if it is a question, but this is something I feel that we are missing, and we probably need to see how do we do that.
Would you like to respond to Poonam's question? Yeah, I think we don't have time for more questions. My apologies for that.
So the question about what was presented to us from Karnataka, I think it's a great experiment. Also, again, in the government, often what happens is that these experiments are often initiated and they die out, they peter out. It's an initiative of a really dynamic, head of a department. So it's very important to ensure that this is a part of what is definitely going to happen. And I think education department must take the lead also. I mean, we used to talk about an Operation Book Flood. Why is it that independent of how they're used for classroom teaching, why can't we flood our schools with a large number of books? Again, of course, availability, etc. is an issue. So it's something we should not even think about whether it's worth doing or it should be done or not. If books are available in the classroom, in the community, books as room-to-read libraries, they're allowed to go and children can borrow books, take them home. Just availability of a large amount of good literature in the community and at school will probably lead slowly towards it becoming a norm. Books being at home, books being read. And slowly this argument that parents are completely illiterate, that's also not true in many places. So I think it's just the one step that can be taken is to flood our schools and communities with variety of books at different levels. And that's very much possible with the resources that we have. The question is to do it in a manner which is not led by one person or at one point, but make it a part of what a school should be like. So that's my one point.
I don't know whether I'm answering any question at all. Just occurred to me that there are many battles to be fought. You see, reading and books are now separate. You could give me a digital piece and that's reading, and that's not a book, it's a digital book. And that has nothing to do with publishing. And that, for example, we took a decision, Storyweaver, for example. Because printing books and sending to far remote villages or wherever is costly. But digitally, if you have a smartphone, it's available. It's cheap, zero. So there is that distinction to be made. There is definitely an experience of reading a book and being attached to a book. Curling up and reading a book is what people talk about, or going to bed with a book. And that is different. That's one. Reading aloud is one thing that you're talking about. Listening to a good book being read by a good reader, that's an experience in itself. We have not done that. That's part of the storytelling piece. It's possible to create these kinds of, so for example, in the next proposal that we can write to donors, could be create teams of story readers who will go from village to village and sit with villagers and say, listen to a story. It could be mythological story, it could be, but just creating this team of people who will go and read stories, read good poems, good readers, creating good readers. We're teaching reading, we are not teaching good reading yet. Those who read, we say, okay, assessment kar diya, khatam ho gaya. Hamara bhi hai na, story level hai, ye level hai, grade level hai. But is he a good reader? What is a good reader? वो देख सुन के पता चलता है. So reading and listening to good reading, because that can influence you. Something that's read well can influence you. And the third piece is that reading, just as this is like a community activity, you can read to a bunch of people. And I remember my grandmother, not very well educated or highly educated, used to gather in the afternoon a lot of ladies from around she was in Kolhapur, she's a village woman. And she used to read the pothi to all these 5 people, 4, 5, 6 friends of hers, and explain to them what was in it. ये तो सब गया, खत्म हो गया. And somehow centralized entertainment has been taken over so much कि locally ये होता नहीं है. How do you do that? So we have destroyed some things. Television में entertainment होता है तो बाकी दूसरी entertainment की क्या ज़रूरत है? I think we need to create some alternatives very strongly, and how will you do that? That is a question mark. Many battles to be fought. I mean, we can talk about sustaining habits, but it's not that simple to do.
All right. Thank you, Madhuji, and thank you to all the dear panelists for your valuable views and insights. As a token of appreciation from all of us gathered here, we would like to present you with a small memento. May I request the team to please bring forward the mementos. Thank you, Madhuji.
This is the best part of Room to Read seminars, paintings by children.
We'll just have a group picture with all the esteemed panelists. You can hold the paintings as well. Round of applause for their support and commitment, please. Thank you very much. So today, alongside celebrating the International Literacy Day, we are also culminating the India Gets Reading campaign for 2022. That is themed on reading equals. This USAID-supported flagship reading campaign of Room to Read India is slowly but surely becoming a movement of change. Now, to tell more about this and to tell the entire story actually, I will request Purnima Garg, the Deputy Country Director of Room to Read, to please step forward. Few lines about Purnima. She is the Deputy Country Director at Room to Read India. She co-leads and supports the Office of the Country Director by providing leadership, strategic direction, management, and evaluation of Room to Read India's programs and country strategy. Purnima has diverse experience in leadership for almost 2 decades in both not-for-profit and for-profit sectors, primarily in education and business management. Her passion is to work on gender equality, inclusion, diversity, early grade foundational learning, and organizational development. She has spent a decade working in the publishing sector on age-appropriate literature, and she was also awarded the title of the Phenomenal She in 2019 by the Indian National Bar Association for the contributions made in advocating to establish ICC in the organization under the POSH Act. Purnima, over to you.
Thank you, David. And I feel wonderful standing in front of this incredible audience. And thank you for the organizers actually to have this session right after the panel discussion, because it could not have been a better way to really talk about the India Gets Reading campaign with what we just discussed, the importance of reading material, the age-appropriate reading material, and how we need to make sure that we have enough reading material available, and, talking about this print-rich environment. I just want to make this a little bit more engaging. Is there anyone who doesn't like the challenges here? Anyone in the audience? Any challenge? Is there anyone who doesn't like a challenge here? Okay. I would say even if challenge doesn't interest you, this is a unique one, and you must take it. So here it's coming your way. Can I please request to play the video? This is one challenge I would like to lose every single time. And today, let's talk about the importance of reading in our everyday lives. We have just spoken so much about reading, and I would just like to take some, key takeaways from our discussion. Reading is a wonderful skill that has created empathetic and critically aware individuals. For 4 years now, through our India Gets Reading campaign, we have witnessed how great an equalizer reading is. Reading and learning continue to open a world of opportunities for children. And actually, it brings children a step closer to equality. Let us briefly witness the campaign's journey started in 2019. Room to Read India, with support of Usaid India team, committed through this campaign to ensure that India actually gets reading. Can we have the presentation, please? So I'll just take you, through this campaign journey. For past 4 years, through the reading campaign, a series of initiatives were organized in the schools, communities, and shared spaces promoting reading, strengthening family engagement, and public participation in bringing social inequalities. These initiatives, including collaboration with Google Bolo app, panel discussions with SCRT, Doon Libraries, in collaboration with Radio Mirchi and 92.7 Big FM. Come 2020, and COVID-19 stuck us all. However, our campaign didn't hold the pandemic. We adapted to new normal, shifted gears, and tried moving beyond the crisis. Because pandemic or no pandemic, the education crisis persisted and education had to continue. Understanding that there was a lack of educational material at home for students, Room to Read India worked out innovative ways to make books and learning material available to them. We launched a mobile library for the first time in Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh. Having received an immense support for this, we have had different variants for this, like Camel Cart Library. Camel Cart Library was one of our most popular libraries. Boat libraries, bike libraries, bullock cart libraries, and the most recent, Kitabo Wala Dakiya. Unique initiatives such as Literacy Cloud and Nalanda Chatbot were also launched in these campaigns to provide new and convenient learning options to students. As Madhav sir said, that we need to be creative. It's just about reading. How you are making sure that children are reading, it's important. Pledge Reading Time has been a constant and popular activity of the reading campaign. And as part of Pledge Reading Time this year, a record-setting attempt through the readathon was attempted. I'm proud to share that through the relentless efforts of our staff, volunteers, partners, and supporters, we were able to bring together more than 1 lakh participants together for all of them who dropped everything and read at the same time for a span of 30 minutes. And yes, you heard it correct. It was 1 lakh participants who came together, dropped everything, and read for that half an hour. This year, the India Gets Reading campaign was themed on reading equals. You see this here at the backdrop. This beautiful yet endurous journey of 4 years and running would not have been possible without our friends and partners from the USAID India team. The entire Room to Read India team is grateful for the continuous support toward our efforts to ensure that India reads and learns. We hope that through this short compilation, we were able to take you through the exciting journey of India Gets Reading campaign. I thank each one of you for joining us in our capabilities and supporting our campaign and the larger mission to ensure that every child finds a room to read. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima. The challenge was indeed exciting. And thank you so much for making us all realize how important reading is for each and every one of us, and for taking us down memory lane from 2019 onwards till now. We have indeed achieved a lot. On this note, I realize we need to recharge our batteries and then break for lunch, come back and start all over again. So I would just request everyone, we are breaking for lunch now. Please utilize 1 hour's lunchtime in networking, and you can also see at the back there's a reading corner set up. So please feel free to go through the reading corner to interact and engage with each other and make best use of this 1 hour. We will gather sharp at 2:30 to commence the next session. Thank you.